What happens when the foundations of your beliefs crumble, leaving you staring into the abyss? What do you do when the stories you were told as a child about purpose, about right and wrong, begin to unravel? Not just intellectually, but deep in your bones. When the rules no longer make sense and the gods have gone silent, you're left with a question that could break you. What now? Friedrich Nietzsche didn't run from that question. He ran straight into it, like a man walking into a storm without flinching. He didn't just see the collapse of traditional religious faith coming. He saw its consequences. He saw the black hole it would leave behind. And he knew in that terrifying silence, something new had to be born. Nietzsche stood at the edge of a chasm. On one side, the fading light of religious certainty. On the other, the cold logic of nihilism. But he didn't choose either. He wanted something else. A third way, a path through the darkness, where meaning isn't given, it's taken, it's built, it's earned. Born in 1844 in a quiet town in Prussia, now part of modern-day Germany, Nietzsche wasn't raised to destroy faith. He was immersed in it. His father, a Lutheran pastor, was a man of God. Faith wasn't just present, it was the foundation of their home. But that foundation cracked early. At just 5 years old, Nietzsche watched his father wither away from a brutal brain disease. A year later, his younger brother died too. Imagine that, 2 graves before your 6th birthday. Death wasn't an idea for Nietzsche. It was a presence, a weight, a question with no answer. What kind of God lets this happen? Those childhood losses didn't just hurt, they haunted. They pulled a young boy out of comfort and threw him headfirst into the raw chaos of life. Pain didn't make Nietzsche bitter. It made him obsessed with truth, with meaning, with understanding what lies beneath all our polished beliefs. He studied theology at the University of Bonn, diving deeper into the religion he was raised in. But something didn't sit right. He wasn't there to memorize answers. He wanted to interrogate them. Within months, he dropped theology entirely. His faith didn't just fade, it collapsed. And that collapse became the starting line of a radical intellectual journey. Nietzsche pivoted to philology, the study of language and ancient texts, at the University of Leipzig. Words fascinated him, not because they were beautiful, but because they shaped how humans made sense of reality. By the time he was in his mid-20s, he became the youngest professor ever appointed at the University of Basel. That record still stands. But titles didn't matter to Nietzsche. Institutions? Empty. Prestige? Meaningless. He left academia behind. His health, which had always been fragile, was deteriorating. It's believed he had a cocktail of illnesses, possibly syphilis, migraines, and genetic issues. He bounced from city to city across Europe, chasing clean air, a softer climate, and a clearer mind. But isolation did something extraordinary. In the silence of the Swiss Alps, with his body in agony and his mind spinning, Nietzsche wrote, and what he wrote would change the world. Books like Human, All Too Human, The Gay Science, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, and On the Genealogy of Morals didn't offer comfort. They offered confrontation. Nietzsche wasn't trying to tell people what they wanted to hear. He was trying to tear off the mask we wear and ask, what's underneath? To Nietzsche, good and evil weren't universal truths. They were tools, crafted by societies to control people. Morality wasn't divine, it was manufactured. The values we cling to were often just chains disguised as virtues. That's where his most famous phrase, God is dead, takes center stage. It wasn't a celebration, it was a diagnosis. He wasn't mocking faith, he was mourning its death, and he feared what would come next. Without the compass of religion, what would guide us? Nietzsche warned of nihilism, a hollowing out of meaning, a society left drifting without direction. He believed we were heading into a moral vacuum, one that could swallow generations whole. But he wasn't content to just sound the alarm. He wanted to build something in the void. And here's where Nietzsche turns. He rejected the search for one truth. For him, there are no facts, only interpretations. Truth was not a finish line to reach, it was a battlefield to enter. He urged people to stop waiting for someone else's answer and start creating their own. Philosophy, literature, music, art, these weren't hobbies. They were tools for survival. Through them, people could shape personal meaning, construct values that resonated deeply, uniquely. But even these expressions, he warned, could become corrupted, turned into products, stripped of soul. So Nietzsche turned inward. He placed the individual, not society, not tradition, at the center of everything. His concept of the Ubermensch, or overman, emerged from this fire. The Ubermensch is not a superhero, it's a fully realized self, someone who shatters expectations, shrugs off dogma, and creates their own moral code from scratch. The Ubermensch isn't trying to dominate others. He's trying to conquer himself. He doesn't seek comfort. He thrives in challenge. Where others see suffering as failure, he sees it as fuel. Self-mastery, self-overcoming. That's the heart of Nietzsche's vision. Not a comfortable life, but a powerful one. A life of tension, of growth, of relentless becoming. But here's the catch. That path isn't for everyone. Can constant striving really lead to fulfillment? Or does it trap us in a cycle of endless dissatisfaction? Nietzsche believed the path to meaning was forged through conflict, not just with the world, but with ourselves. He asked people to stare into the abyss and not flinch, to choose strength over safety, to make life a work of art, even if that art was messy, painful, or misunderstood. And he paid the price. As the years passed, Nietzsche's health collapsed. His writings grew more intense, fragmented, prophetic. Then came the breakdown. In 1889, he saw a horse being beaten in the streets of Turin. He rushed forward, threw his arms around its neck and whispered, "I understand you." He never recovered. The philosopher of willpower and strength spent his final years in silence, cared for by his mother and sister. Was that moment compassion, madness, a crack in the philosophy, or the final consequence of feeling everything too deeply? That's up to you to decide. Nietzsche died in 1900 at the age of 55, almost completely unknown. No fame, no crowds, no acknowledgement from the world he tried to wake up. But death didn't silence him. After he was gone, his words caught fire. Artists, revolutionaries, psychologists, and misfits found something in Nietzsche they couldn't find anywhere else. Raw, unapologetic honesty. A voice that refused to flatter, that refused to lie, that said, "You are more than you've been told to be." Of course, many twisted his ideas. Some used his concept of the Übermensch to justify cruelty and power hunger. But Nietzsche never preached dominance over others. He called for inner dominance, discipline of the self, rebellion against conformity, courage to face reality without illusions. And that's where Nietzsche still speaks to us now. In an age drowning in noise, opinions, trends, and hollow promises, his philosophy is not a comforting blanket, it's a slap in the face. But sometimes that's exactly what we need. He's asking you, if the world gives you no meaning, will you create one? If nothing is sacred, will you make something sacred? If the gods are gone, will you stand up and become your own? That doesn't mean ignoring suffering. Nietzsche didn't pretend life was beautiful and fair. He stared directly at its chaos and said, yes, this too. He believed suffering wasn't just inevitable, it was essential. Not as punishment, not as guilt, but as fuel, the fire through which the self is forged. He called it Amor Fati, the love of fate. Not just accepting your life, but embracing everything it brings. Joy, pain, failure, grief, all of it. As if you had chosen it yourself, as if it was your art. And from that brutal love of reality, something wild and true could be born. Nietzsche believed the person who could say yes to life, even at its worst, was the strongest kind of human. Not the one who hides behind beliefs, but the one who builds something deeper without them. That's the Ubermensch, not a fantasy, a challenge. He wasn't trying to give us answers. He was trying to destroy the illusions that kept us from asking better questions. Questions like, what would your life look like if you weren't trying to fit into anyone's script? What if you didn't just survive your suffering, but transform through it? This isn't just philosophy, it's a psychological revolution. Nietzsche challenges the idea that meaning is something we stumble upon. He says you have to make it, fight for it, bleed for it. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about becoming someone who can carry the weight of life without breaking. Someone who doesn't beg for answers, but becomes the answer. So here's where it gets real. If your beliefs collapse, if the gods you trusted fall silent, what will you stand on? What will you create in the silence? You don't need a religion to give you morality. You don't need a system to give you worth. Nietzsche is handing you the responsibility, and the danger, and the freedom. You get to shape your values, but no one's coming to save you. No path is carved for you, and no excuse will hold. That kind of freedom is terrifying, and it should be, because it means you matter. Your choices, your mindset, your courage. It all matters, not because some eternal judge is watching, but because this life, the one you're in right now, is everything. This is your stage, this is your story. And Nietzsche's ghost is whispering, don't just exist, don't just conform, don't just cope. Become someone you can respect. Become someone who faces the abyss and doesn't look away. Someone who takes the chaos, the heartbreak, the confusion, and builds from it something strong, something fierce, something real. You won't find this in a self-help book. You won't get it from a guru. You won't find it scrolling through filtered happiness. You'll find it when you decide to look in the mirror and say, whatever I've been is not all I will be. You were not born to repeat. You were born to recreate. So next time you feel the weight of life pressing down, when nothing makes sense and the old answers fall flat, don't run, use it. Face the void, stare back, and write your own meaning into the silence. Because in the end, the question isn't whether life has meaning. The question is, will you create one worth living for? And as Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. So, what's your why? And more importantly, what are you willing to become to live it? Let that question sit. Don't rush to answer it. Let it burn a little. If this stirred something in you, if Nietzsche's raw, fearless voice cracked through the noise, stick with us. We're just getting started. This isn't just a philosophy channel. This is a place to break the script, confront the real, and rewire your mind. Subscribe, and let's keep walking this path together. Till next time, don't run from the abyss. Walk into it, eyes open, and make it yours.